Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Teacher Talk, the podcast. We're now on episode 4, and today I'm here with Mr. C. Say hi.
Howdy.
Mr. C is not your typical teacher in the upper school, but he oversees the yearbook class as well as teaching digital storytelling. But he's also most known for his amazing photography that he does for Trinity. And I mean, amazing. I think I first got to know Mr. C in one of our many theater photo shoots, which I wasn't a big fan of at the beginning because I was just some like awkward freshman/sophomore. But now I'm a big fan of any time you come and take photos of us in our class. I didn't even know that I was going to end up interviewing Mr. C, but we talked about it last week and I've been looking forward to it since. He really has an amazing story and I can't wait to dive in. But before we do that, I had to throw some silly icebreaker questions in there. So starting off, what's the weirdest photo you've ever taken?
I'd have to say it's a weird story. It's not.
Okay.
I don't even know if I still have this photo, but when I was in grad school at Carolina, I think it was 2005, Carolina won the national championship. And so
Oh, wow.
things were getting crazy on
Yeah,
Franklin
yeah.
Street. And I was in the middle of the street with a bonfire going on. I think it was like a couch or like who knows what was going, it was burning. And it was so hot that like the zipper on my pants was like starting to burn me.
Wow.
Yeah, and not the best place to get burned. And so it was that hot. And I was like pushing back. I was getting pushed back in. And I remember I took like 3 or 4 frames in a row of this guy who showed up with just his undies and like rolled into the fire and came back out.
Oh!
And he was definitely had been celebrating a lot.
Right.
And so for one frame, like he's popped back up in that frame, he's fine. In the next frame, his whole body is like purple.
Oh my gosh.
And we were in the downstairs of the basement of the journalism school, all looking at our photos the next morning, and like I was like, "Yo, check this out, guys!" And they were like, "That was my friend. He was in the ER with like 3rd-degree burns." So
that's insane.
Kind of a crazy story.
Yeah, that is.
I don't know
a
if that
crazy
photo ever.
story.
I was like, well, here's the photo if he ever wants to see how kind of crazy he was. But yeah.
Yeah, if you
he
could
survived,
find that,
but
that is
crazy story.
so funny. Yeah, I feel like that also takes the crazy, funny, embarrassing photo backstory. So that's awesome. And like I said, you have a pretty unique story and amazing personality. So which movie or TV character do you think you're the most like?
So the obvious answer to me is Ed Norton.
Okay,
I don't know if I'm like him as personality, although kinda.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have been saying, you look like Ed Norton. And I see it. Like, I see it.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah.
I like
that's
Ed Norton.
definitely there. I remember.
He's got a lot of he shows up in different ways, from like Fight Club, where he's kind of like more of a dweeb trying to get in shape, which is probably more like me. Or like American History X, he's like this super buff, like jacked dude. I'm like, okay, life goals, whatever. Yeah. So, but he's I like him a lot.
Me and Sadie were like just talking about that the other week. I think we were like, it's Ed Norton or something. Yeah. That's awesome. And just for a fun question, because I don't think I know anything about your music taste at all, but what's a guilty pleasure song you secretly love?
Fancy like.
Really?
Yeah. It's such an earworm.
That is so
like
funny.
I am literally planning to take my wife to Applebee's and get their $25 date night special because of that song.
That is really fun. So you'll just like play it sometimes? Like
as soon as I heard about it, I was just like, I love the word bougie. I like to try to use it whenever I can. Yeah. And so, and like the line where he's like, the natty light styrofoam cooler squeaking. That's such a visual line, and like
so
I'm there, like so.
There.
Yeah,
that is so funny.
Yeah.
And then obviously, you're really skilled at photography and storytelling. But if you could master one other skill, like an instrument or language or anything else, what would it be?
I'm just going really off the top of my head here, so we'll take what we get. Some kind of martial arts.
Okay.
Ninja style, unsuspecting, but like, whoa, I just got taken down. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I actually I after I watched Cobra Kai, do you know Cobra Kai, the show? After, it was like 2 years ago I watched it, and I like was researching like karate places in Durham because I was like, I want to do this.
No, it has that effect on you. Like, so Cobra Kai's father is the Karate Kid. Not like the movie wise.
Yeah.
Like Karate Kid, I grew up on the Karate Kid.
Yeah.
And like doing the crane kick.
Yes.
My parents made me take gymnastics class because, of course, I was like every kid, I want to take karate. And they're like, do gymnastics first. I think because it was like free with our Y membership or something, you know? And they're like, we're not paying for Karate Kid class, you know, unless you prove. And I never made it through I never made it through the gymnastics.
No, but that would just be fun.
I have the crane kick down though. Like,
I'm sure.
I would crush you with my crane kick if I had to.
I'm so sure.
But then I'd probably fall over.
That's awesome. And just one last little photography-centered question. If you could take photos anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
South Africa. I don't know, we might talk about this later, but
yeah.
I spent a year living there. I did my master's thesis work there, and the light, it's just different. It's different. A friend of mine from the township where I lived, called Mamelodi, he came and visited, and he's like, try to do my South African. He's like, oh, the light here is very dim. And I was like, it's dim here. I don't know. We're used to it. It's like, it's just, South Africa's beautiful. Yeah. It's got everything from nature, wildlife, which I'm not really a wildlife photographer, but I mean, you can't not get into it. It's just amazing. Yeah. But then also just like visiting, we visit a lot of people's homes, very, very impoverished people, like, you know, a family of 6 or 7 living in a tin shack. Yeah. And the light would like creep through the cracks in the tin and make these like really dramatic, beautiful, like it was really just cool to capture those stories in that kind of dramatic light setting. Yeah. And we still have a lot of those photos hanging up on the walls in our house from that year. So I'd go back there in a heartbeat.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And my wife would go with me. She would probably, the tickets are probably already booked. I mean, she's ready to go.
That's awesome. And then moving on to the deeper questions. You gave me some background info before today, and honestly, like I didn't know much of the story. So starting off with your teenage years, they were really unique. From military school, to having cancer at 15. What were these years like for you, and how did they shape who you are today?
I'll say, so I grew up in Culver, Indiana, and my dad was, he worked at the military school, Culver Military Academy. So I grew up as Little C, because he was Mr. C. And so, you know, as a little elementary school, I think we moved there in 4th grade, and then up through middle school, and then finally I went to high school there. And so that was formative in just seeing it's a different world. I mean, military, boarding school, it's not a world that most people see. In middle school, I got bullied because of that. So like I went to the public middle school, but there was a little bit of tension between the townies and the bluebellies, like we each called each other. So like they were like, your dad works there, you're rich. And I was like, he works there, but like so they'd be like, give me your lunch money. And like I got bullied all the time. I was just trying to like I was just like avoiding. You knew what hallway, because it was a middle school, junior senior high school they called it, and so there was like you try to avoid the older kids if you could. So I was very glad to get to Culver and kind of like but I was also a little bit, you know, unique. I was a faculty kid. I wasn't like a lot of those kids who, you know, their parents were very, very wealthy. Yeah. I was kind of the guy who's like, I'm just here with my hand-me-down uniform and but it was a great experience. Now, talking about cancer, that came around after my freshman year. I was going into sophomore year. Through the summer, I discovered, and then they took it out, a little thing in my nose. I thought it was like a pimple or whatever, and I was just trying to, but it wouldn't pop. And they tested it. Turned out it was a very rare cancer called rhabdomyosarcoma. Wow. And without belaboring the whole story, like basically I went through a year of chemotherapy, and I went from sort of coming in, like once you go through your freshman year, your plebe year at at Culver, you've made it. You know, you're like, okay, I'm not like these weak kids. And so I was going into sophomore year, honestly, like pretty prideful. I thought I was like God's gift to women, and everybody, like, I just was on top of the world. I was just such a jerk, honestly, if I look back. And so, like, one of the cures to that is to, like, carve up your face and get some stitches, lose all your hair. And that's what happened. And it was the best gift I could have gotten, honestly. I mean, it sucked. It was not fun. My lowest moment probably was when I thought I was going to have to drop out of school. And I just the thought of all my peers kind of like moving on and me staying back and having this freshman class, I would have been part of them, as, you know, and like that just really crushed me. But that was the lowest moment. And it was the lowest moment too, because like the week before I had just spent the weekend in the ICU, barely had a blood pressure. Like it was rough. The chemo they give you for that is really bad. It's called Cytoxin. Like, right? Like, that doesn't sound.
Yeah, no.
But that moment, it was sort of like the end of the rope of like, this is what I can do. And God had to take over because there was nowhere else to go. And our whole family, it was like my mom and my dad and me on the couch, and we all just kind of like cried it out and let go. And from that moment, it really was like God took over. You know, during high school, you're starting to find your own faith apart from your parents, if that's what you grew up with. But it's kind of accelerated that, because there was times in the hospital I just was like alone, because my mom had gone home to the Ronald McDonald House or wherever she was spending the night, and I was stuck there feeling crappy, and the nurses and I would just be alone, and I would feel God with me. And so I started to have my own experience of faith and what that looked like. And at the end of that, you know, I had a chance to really share with a lot of my peers to say what I just told you. Like, I would do this again. The perspective that it gave me, like, just not sweating so many small things that high schoolers tend to think about and worry about. You know, I was all of that was like, whatever, I'm alive. You know? And I came out of that alive and well. And to this day, I'm still here. Have no health issues related to that whatsoever. And so it's just, and there's more to that story I'm happy to tell you about. I don't want to take up the whole podcast with Nathan's cancer story. So.
Yeah, that's really amazing that you're able to see it as a gift, because obviously not many people can look at it that way. So that's really amazing. And then you eventually went to grad school for journalism at UNC, which is great, because that's what I'm majoring in.
Okay, right on.
It was going to be at UNC, not anymore. But what drew you to journalism, and how did you know that it was the right path for you?
I didn't really have the word journalism in my vocabulary, and honestly, I didn't have a good opinion of journalism in that regard. What happened is I took a year after college. I worked for a year back at Culver. I did an internship. Okay. Didn't make a ton of money, but I didn't have any expenses, so I saved up, and then I went backpacking, kind of like a gap year, but just after college. Yeah. With me and a buddy, we went around. It was an amazing year, all over Europe. We just had some great adventures, or whatever. I took photos all along the way, and I loved it. And when I looked back, I was at a Christian study center in Switzerland called L'Abri, and I didn't have a way to download my photos. This was my first digital camera. This is before I had all film cameras. Was it like a nice one, or no? Okay. But it's the one I could afford. It was like 1 megapixel, literally. Like anyone's phone, any age, is like a better camera than that. But anyway, so there was a guy there who was redoing their website, and he let me download it, and he burned it onto a CD. That's back when we had to do all that. And he was looking at my photos. He was like, "These are really cool. Can I use these on the L'Abri website that I'm redoing?" And I was like, "Sure, that'd be awesome." Yeah. That kind of stuck in my head. And then another moment, I looked back. When I was working back at Culver for that internship year, we had taken a trip to Cuba, and my favorite thing was like taking the photos and putting it to, I think it was a Dave Matthews Band song.
Oh, that's awesome.
And just like in PowerPoint, but just like syncing it up and getting it going. Like I loved that. And so I had those things in my head. I moved to Chapel Hill because that's the buddy I'd been backpacking with. That's where he was going to finish up undergrad. And I just started doing whatever I could. And
Yeah.
there was an ice storm, shut everything down, except there was this one place on Franklin Street that was open. So we all went there, and I ran into a friend of mine from undergrad at Sewanee. We weren't even that close, but it was just like, oh, I remember you went to Sewanee. I went to Sewanee. So we started chatting, and I was telling her about stuff. She's like, you should check out the journalism school right here. They do exactly like that's what I'm okay, I'll apply. So I applied, went in for an interview to see if I was going to get, it was like a dual, like, are you going to get a scholarship, and are you even going to get in the program for the master's program? Met my wife. It wasn't my wife then, but met Rebecca, who is now my wife, like at that interview weekend.
Wow. That's crazy.
I got in, and that's when I realized, like, I'm a storyteller. Yeah. Because everything they did there was called stories. It would be like the ancient way, stories from Spain. Like that was a summer project we did. My thesis was called HIV Stories, exploring the themes of AIDS, poverty, and faith in the township. So I fell in love with story. And I did actually was a formal journalist. I worked at WRL.com for a couple of years. But since then, I've been telling stories just kind of in lots of different ways.
That's awesome.
And I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're clearly an amazing and gifted storyteller too. And how do you see storytelling as a spiritual or redemptive act?
You know, that's a really good question. You could go a lot of different ways with that. Just quickly, like, storytelling is it's a labor of love. You have to really be a good listener, and to tell someone's personal story, it's an honor and a privilege, because everyone's made in the image of God and has a great story. Sometimes you have to dig for it. Sometimes what you think it is isn't what it turns out to be. My biggest thing was when I was working with my photo professor at UNC, who's also a believer, just a great guy. I had met somebody in South Africa, a pastor who was here in Chapel Hill for a conference, and I was like, I'm thinking about doing some stories. And he's like, come to Mamelodi. We have many stories. And I was like, okay. And my thesis advisor was like, that's great, but like you can't do AIDS the way everyone else has done it. That's been done too many times. Like you got to do something. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to. He's like, we work together on and kind of coming up with this idea that like there's redemptive stories. I always tell people there was a class we took in, I forget, it was like, I think it was research statistics class in journalism school. And they said like the more news that you consume, this was a study that we were reading, the more news you consume, the higher you estimate crime rates to be, to the point that you'll estimate them higher than they actually are. And so what I took from that was like, most journalism is just painting a picture of the world that's negative because that's what sells, honestly. You know, people, if it bleeds, it leads is kind of the saying. Yeah. And so I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go there and just talk about all the people dying. And so I worked hard to find redemptive stories. And I truly believe that. One of my favorite quotes is from Mr. Rogers, and he tells a story about how, you know, when he would see bad things on the news, his mom would say, always look for the helpers. And so that was like, I didn't have that quote in my mind at the time. Like that came later in my life, but that to me was what I wanted to do. Yeah. And so that's the redemptive lens of storytelling. I think is really important. That even in the midst of a tragedy, to find like there's people helping, there's people diving in, tell those stories so that we can get a fuller picture of reality and also have hope. Yeah.
And what was that experience like in doing that for the thesis
in South Africa?
Yeah,
it was really cool. It pushed me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah,
you know, a lot of times I'll tell the story when I'm teaching the photography students in digital storytelling. When they're feeling, I'll see them taking photos and they're kind of like stuck in one spot. They don't want to like if they're at like opening chapel and they don't want to like be noticed, whatever.
Right.
I'm like, I had 2 weeks, 2 different trips that I was able to take working on my thesis project. That was it. 1 week and then a second week, both in the summer. And I needed to photograph. I was doing a story about a gravedigger who had been a part of being a gravedigger since apartheid, when they were burying all kinds of people. And then he was also part of this AIDS pandemic, burying lots of people. And so I needed photographs at his gravesite, and there was like the graveyard that he was in charge of, and there was so many people, and there was language barrier. I wanted to be as truthful and honest in my storytelling, to be like, did they die of AIDS? I didn't want to photograph, make a funeral of like somebody that just, I don't know, died of a car wreck or whatever. Like, I wanted it to be truthful. So I kind of had to like ask, but then there was also stigma around that. All this to say, it was very, and then also I was like, am I stepping on someone's grave? Am I like breaking social norms I'm not aware of? And I had this huge long lens, and I'm the only white guy in this township with all blacks. And I just had to push through that, you know?
Yeah.
And I witnessed some beautiful things because of it. Number one, I realized that people are staring at me because I'm the white guy with a long camera. That's just, they haven't seen that a lot. So that's why they're staring at me. Even though I might take those looks to be like, you're not supposed to be here, whatever. That's how the insecure part of me wanted to take it.
Yeah.
But I learned, like, no, they're just, I'm curious. I'm a curiosity to them. So just keep it on. But one of the coolest thing I witnessed from that, one of the coolest moments I witnessed was there was a lot of funerals. And so 2 were happening at basically the same time, just a little bit apart. And there's lots of singing. South Africa's a beautiful singing culture. They mourn with song, just singing their hearts out as people are like shoveling the dirt in. And they both of these places were singing, had a song going, and it was different.
Yeah.
One of their songs ended over here with this faraway group. I was with the first group. And when the song ended, the kind of the Western mentality of my mind was like, oh, this is kind of rude, because that other group is going to be like hearing this other song going, hey, we're trying to have our private moment. But they didn't think about it that way. They were like, this is our moment. And so both groups just started singing. Like the group that stopped singing, they just started picking up the other group's song. And it was like they didn't miss a beat. It wasn't like it was just part of, like, it was like so natural to them. And so
that's awesome.
One of my favorite songs, I would always come home from those singing songs, and like one of them was like this. So I know like this famous funeral song from Mama Lodi, and the words go something like, here I am, Lord, take me.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Anyway.
Yeah. What
I told other stories besides the gravedigger too. Real quick, we did a labor and delivery nurse who had switched to being a hospice nurse because she wanted to care for people.
Yeah.
We did a story about a group of children. It was like a child-headed household, or like they were all orphans. Yeah. And just that one kind of posed the question, like, here's the future generation, and what will life be like for them? But they were, again, it was like beautiful and terrible at the same time to see their just beautiful faces with like all the poverty around them of just like the stench and the brokenness literally where they lived, and just the vulnerability. Like there's no adults around, like no good adults, I should say.
Right.
And so that one was, it kind of posed a question at the end of the story. So it was, then there was another story about a granny who was taking care of her grandkids because the middle generation had kind of died out from AIDS. And so.
And do you still have all those photos?
Yeah,
from
I do.
cases?
I do.
I want to see them.
Yeah, I'd love to share them.
Yeah. And then my next question is about kind of like the media industry, because today it can really be like a scary and pretty secular place in today's world. So what does your faith look like in the creative world, especially in a media industry that can sometimes corrupt people of faith or even pull people away from it?
Yeah. I think it's natural if you're a journalist and you are digging into a lot of negative things to kind of get jaded by that. And that's hard. I mean, that's hard. It's a reality. It's kind of the problem of evil in a very tangible way. Like you're really wrestling with that. So it's hard. I haven't been on the front lines as a journalist in that way necessarily for a ton of stuff. I've kind of focused on finding those stories that have the hopeful angle to them. That's the way I stay. That's why I stay sane. As far as creativity and faith and that kind of thing, I think that well, maybe that's not your question. We'll save the rest of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll stop there because there's a whole tangent I could go
And you also shared that you have won 10 Emmy Awards, which I feel like people don't really know, because obviously you're not gonna go around saying that. But it's incredible. So how do you stay grounded and keep your work rooted in purpose?
So before I was at Trinity, I was working full time at the company I started called Story Driven, and we really set out, our goal was to tell redemptive stories that I was describing earlier.
Yeah.
And the way we're grounded is just that, like, we're serving our clients. I set up the business not to be like, we're gonna tell the best stories, but like we're gonna serve clients, and we want to find good stories so that we can tell them, but like it's their story. And so, you know, I remember calling after one Emmy Award we had done about it was a startup based in the UK, but they had offices here in RTP, and they had developed a test so that it's like you could see if the treatment you were on was working more quickly. And like, especially with like lung cancer, whenever they have to do a biopsy, you can only do that so many times before it's just too invasive and whatever. And so they were able to do with a quick blood test to be like, is this treatment working? No, move on to the next one. And so we did a story about their very first patient that they helped, and he lived many years beyond what he would have. And so we got to go to England and France, and I remember calling that client to say, hey, I just want to let you know we won an Emmy Award. Like, this is a real honor for all of us to be able to celebrate this story, and that it you know, and to celebrate the patient too, who at that point already passed on. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's amazing. And like we said, you've won a bunch of awards, but what accomplishment has meant the most to your soul, do you think?
To me, I love collaborating with other people. I mean, every single one of those Emmy Awards, there was like many other people involved. Right. And so I'm not, storytelling's not really a solo sport. Yeah. I think it works better in collaboration. I mean, you're collaborating with the person whose story you're telling. Like, it really is a collaboration. I think there was a story we did that I loved it. It was about this was for UNC Health, and they wanted to do a story about the guy who was one of their patients who had the first double lung transplant in North Carolina. And it's a cystic fibrosis patient. And so we got to know his story, and me and my business partner at the time were talking about it, and we were like, man, it would be so cool if he would like write a letter to his organ donor, you know? But he hadn't done that. Yeah. And so we were like, well, let's just pitch it to him. Be like, so we kind of shaped the story, but it was real at the same time. Right, yeah. There's an ethical line there, and I think we stayed on the right side, but we weren't just purely documentary, and that was okay because our client wanted us to tell the story. It wasn't trying to be pure documentary, you know what I mean? And we didn't make it up. We were like, hey, what if you like wrote that letter? Because he mentioned that he wished that he could tell his, but he had it. And we're like, what if you wrote the letter and like this video is your excuse to do it? And he's like, oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And he resisted it. I mean, it was the night before the shoot. He still had not written the letter. And we were like, dude, we're banking on this. Like, we don't have another plan. And he finally did, and he read it, and it was beautiful. Yeah. And that was like the guiding theme for the whole video, was like him reading the letter and then him telling his story. And it was beautiful. I mean, and I think it was actually the part of it that I really am proud of is not necessarily that it made a beautiful video. It did. It was an Emmy Award winner. It was great. But that he was able to, like, it pushed him to not procrastinate that anymore and just to do it. And so it changed his life for the better too. Yeah. I think that's a grand slam. I mean, what else you can ask for?
Yeah, that's amazing. And you, like we've talked about before, you lived in South Africa for a year, which is amazing. What was it like to live there for a year doing community development work? And you talked about this a little bit already, but does being a photographer and storyteller change the way you view different places you go?
100%. Yeah. I mean, the answer is yes. What was it like being there? It was life-changing, for sure. The organization we worked with, we're still really good friends with the couple that leads it. They really like brought us into this approach that like we're not here to like fix anything or like have all the answers. We're really here to come alongside the things because God's already at work in this community that doesn't have the same resources that we have. But we're not here to just like pour money or like we're here to like work alongside them. And so one of the things we did that was just you don't have to be skilled at anything to help with this, but like they would collect food from their local grocery store and they would prepare a meal or just like take it, and it was stuff that like had expired like that day or like the day before, but it was still basically good, but just the store couldn't sell it. And so we helped kind of bolster that relationship because the pickups were kind of spotty because they didn't always have transportation. So we're like, we'll just work it out with the grocery store. Every Monday we'll come get it, you know, so then they can count on it, and it worked. So we would do that, and we would go visit people in their homes, and we would bring them food. I mean, a lot of time, I remember so many times this one Go-Go, which is Granny, would I mean, she would just be like, "Thank you, Lord, thank you. I was praying this morning for food, and here it is." Like, just their faith was such an encouragement, and we really did. I mean, so people often say like, "I went to serve, and I received way more than I gave," and like that's how it felt. Like we learned how to be thankful for just air, just for breath, you know, definitely for food, and honestly, I really experienced. There's kind of three. I love this philosophy called triperspectivalism that I learned when I was training to be an elder in a church. It's super like heady theology, but like there's this idea that you can learn different ways. There's through the head, through the heart, and through your hands. You can start. I mean, Western approach is kind of like you start with the head, but I really believe you could start with any of those. And as you fill in the other pieces, it becomes fuller knowledge. So like if I understand something in my head, let's take the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I understand that idea. Heaven comes to earth and like brings a new reality. But I didn't understand that in my heart or my hands until this moment we went into this very dark place. The woman, there was 3 really old people who lived there. One of them was blind, one of them couldn't walk, and the other was just very feeble, had been a witch doctor her whole life. It was a dark place. I mean, it was like, it's almost just like somebody put the fader on the lights when you walked in. It just it was oppressive. The smells, because they didn't take care of themselves very well. It was kind of like, cover your face up. And we would go in there, and again, the people from the church where we served were leading the way. Like we were just kind of standing in the back, praying along, but they led the way. And you would feel the kingdom of God advance. You would just feel the atmosphere lift, and they would be singing and just praying, asking, "Hey, how can we pray for you? What do you need? Can we bring you some food?" And it just one day it just really hit me like we were on the edge of the kingdom of God right here. There's darkness, and we brought the kingdom of God, and we felt heaven come to earth. Like I felt it in a way that you can't just understand in your head. Right. It was beautiful, and like we had so many experiences like that were just life-changing.
That's incredible. So. Yeah, I last summer I got the chance to do work crew for Young Life, and it made me want to do something like that outside of the country because it was such a formative experience, but it's also like I'm serving, but I'm serving for people who live here who are already privileged, whatever. But it still matters, obviously. It was great, but it made me want to go and serve somewhere that is less fortunate, because I feel like there's so much to that, and like I just want to be able to experience that. So I'm hoping to do something like that, maybe throughout college. Maybe
totally, you should do it.
Definitely sometime. And then last bigger question. Obviously, you're an accomplished person and got to be so through pursuing your passion, what you found to be your passion. So how would you encourage others to pursue their passions, but do so while also pursuing God's kingdom?
You say, but also, I think it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I think as you grow closer with God, I mean, I love the verse that says, you know, God just grants you the desires of your heart, you know, and he's not going to grant you evil desires if they're in your heart.
Yeah.
But as he purifies your heart, your desires become his will in a very mysterious and wonderful way. And so I think it's important to follow your desires. Do you know what I mean? Like, I forget who I picked this up from, but at some point in my storytelling training, you know, was like, pay attention to what you're curious about, you know, because that desire in you is like, there's something there. And that's your unique perspective that you can offer that someone else can't, you know, because you were paying attention to that. And so I think paying attention to your desires is good, and to cultivate them. It's not like saying like, I'm just going to go do what I want. That's not really the attitude or the posture. Yeah. But it's like, hey, for me, like when I go back, I was just like thinking about what do I want to do with my life as I'm backpacking around Europe. It was like I just kind of took stock. Like, I love taking photos. I love meddling with things like web designy kind of things, and like I called it at journalism school, they called it multimedia. I didn't have that word yet. I just called it web design. I was like making websites. It was the first thing I did when I got back from backpacking. I just made a website. Like coded it all by myself. Just like I wanted my photos to get out there.
Yeah.
And so just pay attention to that. You know, like there's something to that. And now what do I do here at Trinity School? I take photos all the time, and I make our website. I do the social media. Like, I get to do that now, and it's like, and I get to learn new things. That's part of what my desires is. I feel excited if there's something new I get to learn. Yeah. Like when you guys were in here setting up this thing, and I was like, oh, I've never actually used GarageBand to record directly from two mics. This is cool. I'm learning. You know, I love it. Yeah. I love it. It's the best part.
Yeah. That's amazing. And this is probably pretty similar, but what ways do you think creativity can be used for kingdom work?
I think it's essential to create kingdom work. I don't think of it as an add-on or like some kind of icing on the cake. I think God is a creative God. I mean, just look around, right? Like, it wasn't an afterthought that God made things amazing the way they are. And so I think tapping into your creativity is tapping into who God made you to be. A lot of people, I'll put a caveat to that too. A lot of people think, oh, I'm not really creative. And they mean like they couldn't like paint a cool painting or whatever. But, you know, there's people who love Excel, for instance, or like Google Sheets. And there's creativity in that, in like, how am I going to take all this data and make sense of it? And like, there's problem solving. Honestly, the number one skill of storytelling, and really anything that you want to do in life that's worth it, is problem solving, because it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just like fall out. Ask any artist, ask any person with a job. Like, things don't just fall out and appear. Like, if they do, you know that was just, you know, a lucky day. But like, you have to work at it. And so problem solving is such a huge skill, and it's related to creativity, because to get the vision that you might have in your head out, you got to work at it. And so, I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah,
except
no, that's great.
That and
so true.
Creativity and doing God's will, it's like, it's the same.
It's the same.
It's not exactly the same, but they're not different. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then for some shorter closing questions.
By the way, just these questions are really good.
The what?
All of your questions.
Thank
you.
You
like, you clearly put a lot of thought into it, and I really appreciate that, because you have such promise as a storyteller, just based on these questions and how all this is going. Yeah. I'm excited you're going to do journalism.
Me too. I can't wait. So, first question. We all know that high school is hard. I've especially been feeling it recently more than ever. So, what's one piece of advice you'd give your high school self?
My wife and I have been talking about this, actually, because we have 2 teenage boys. Right. And we're like, what do we want them to learn that, you know, you might not learn in school or whatever. And so we actually, I'll give my wife the credit. She was like, because we usually on Sunday nights kind of have prayer time, talk about it the week. And she's like, let's transform this a little bit because it was getting a little stale. And like, let's just like talk about things that we want our kids to know about. And so we have a whole list. But I'll tell you one. The one, the first thing that comes to mind is, I think when you're young, you have the privilege that you don't realize to just try something.
Yeah.
And I've been seeing all these amazing theater productions here at Trinity. I'm just blown away. And I think back in my high school, I'm like, I could have done that. I just never, I didn't, like, theater people weren't my people, I guess, or I never dipped my toe in there.
Yeah.
And then also, like, when I was in undergrad, I had a chance to take a class with a professor who had studied directly as like the TA for C.S. Lewis.
Oh wow!
He was like, he's like hanging with Clive Staples, you know, all the time.
That's crazy.
And I didn't take the class. You want to know why? Okay, this is Youth 101 example. The class was at 8 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know it's true, right? You know it's true.
Yeah.
And my senior year, I wanted my schedule to be like stacked. My first class was like at 1 p.m. Woohoo! But that was so stupid. Like that was just an example of just I should have just done it. You know?
Yeah.
Just do it. You only live once. You can sleep later. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
So try lots of things. That's my advice.
No, that's encouraging because I'm in calc right now and I'm like I'm struggling. Like I might have to take an exam next week. That's a different problem. But I was like thinking yesterday and I was like I could have taken the easier class, but like I didn't. And I'm kind of glad cuz I feel like I've pushed myself. Like it's been really hard, but I feel like honestly like I'm glad I chose it cuz like I've learned about myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was a good choice.
Yeah. So next shorter question, what's one truth about God or life that you've come to believe more deeply with time?
This is a tough one. I thought about it a good bit. I think the best answer is that God is faithful.
Yeah.
You know, it takes time and experience to have that perspective, because, you know, every new challenge you face, you're kind of focused in on that challenge and kind of maybe overwhelmed by it or just like, what am I going to do? And you see it in the Bible, you know, like God's like, remember this time? And there was like rituals in the Jewish tradition to remind people, you know, like, hey, we're going to set up this Ebenezer to like remind us every year. We're going to set up Passover to remind us that this thing happened. Yeah. And lots of ways to remind ourselves, and I think that reminding is storytelling. You know, that's one application of storytelling is to be like, these are before journalism, print journalism, and the printing press, that's what people had, like oral stories. Yeah. It's just pass the stories down, and that's how people. I mean, I could go on a whole podcast about how the brain works and storytelling, and like I studied that specifically, not at journalism school, but in like telling stories for marketing purposes to really understand like what keeps people's attention and all of that. And like we are wired to do stories, you know, and to understand the world through stories and to remember things that way. And so, I don't know. Yeah. If you have any follow-up question on that.
That's great. And then this is kind of an abstract question, but I felt like you would have an answer for it. So what's one story you haven't told yet but hope to tell someday?
I would love to kind of like going back to that story, like witnessing and experiencing the kingdom of God advance. I would love to just go to places where there's like missionaries or whatever people who are on the very edge of the kingdom of God, seeing amazing things going on. I mean, my dream honestly would be like to like take all the kids out of school and like do like probably more than a year, honestly, to like travel to those places, whether it's around the U.S. in some kind of like, you know, van life situation or like a bigger one because I got 4 kids and but also then around the world and just talk to those folks, you know, and like learn from them.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, that's great.
That's not one story. That's probably a ton of stories.
Yeah,
that could be a whole lifetime, honestly. But to me, that would be so life-giving. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of those kind of people maybe aren't necessarily the best storytellers. Or it's hit or miss. They might be. We actually met a woman in Swaziland that we would love to go back and visit who is an amazing storyteller. And she runs a place called Abandoned Babies for Christ. Wow. And they literally take in abandoned babies and they nurse them back for health and then get them adopted after a few years. And amazing storyteller. Oh, you could just sit and listen to her all day. Of course, she's got that thick, like South African accent, and like it's beautiful. And we still are in touch with her and on her newsletter and send support, you know, that's occasionally. And, that's those kind of places I would love to do. So maybe someday you'll see those.
Yes, I'd love to see them. And finally, here's a little exercise. I don't know if you got the chance to see it, but the question is, if you had to take a single photo to sum up your faith journey so far, what would be in the frame? Just take that how you will. It's kind of another abstract.
I think it's going to be a portrait of somebody with just really beautiful natural light. And maybe, it's going to be a portrait of somebody. That's all I know. Yeah. Yeah. And that the person has a lot of life in their face, whether good or bad. There's a lot of pain and struggle and beauty, like a juxtaposition, I guess. Yeah. The background maybe isn't all that pretty, but tells a story too of like their environment, but their strength too. Yeah, I love that. I think I really like showing people who may be in a weak situation, but like showing their strength. And knowing that awesome. Ultimately comes from God. But people are tough. I mean, people like they do more than we think they could. Yeah. That's inspiring to me to be like, I can do more than I think I can. But also just it's beautiful to see God use people in those ways. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to do this.
It's been really good.
And share just your delightful story and so much wisdom too, and especially because I'm interested in doing what you're doing. It's been great for me. And thank you everyone out there listening. Make sure to like and subscribe. And I'll be back with another episode soon.